In a cramped motel room that smelled of mildew and broken dreams, Emma clutched her 7-year-old daughter Lily close, their belongings reduced to 2 battered suitcases and a stack of final notices. At 25, she had lost everything to medical debt and predatory lenders. Then the lawyer's letter arrived, announcing an inheritance from a distant aunt she barely remembered, a decrepit house on 40 acres in the Montana wilderness. The attached photos showed a collapsing structure the county had condemned twice, land so remote no one wanted it. The lawyer called it worthless, advised her to sign it over to the state. But Emma saw something else in those photographs, something the cold professional eyes had missed. What secret could a condemned house hold that would lift a desperate mother and daughter from poverty? What had her aunt left behind that no one else could see? The motel room on the outskirts of Sacramento smelled of mildew, stale cigarette smoke, and the particular kind of despair that clings to places where people wash up when they have nowhere else to go. Emma sat cross-legged on the sagging double bed, 25 years old but feeling ancient, her fingers moving mechanically through the stack of envelopes that had been forwarding to this address for the past 3 months. Beside her, 7-year-old Lily was curled under a thin floral bedspread that had been washed so many times the pattern was barely visible, her small body finally still after a day of anxious energy in the cramped space that had become their world. The medical bills were sorted into 3 piles on the worn comforter, the ones marked final notice in angry red letters, the ones threatening legal action, and the ones from collection agencies who would hound her until she died or disappeared. 2 years ago, Lily had been diagnosed with a rare blood disorder that required emergency treatment and months of specialist care. Emma's bare minimum insurance had covered almost nothing. The bills had come in waves, drowning her in impossible numbers. She had sold everything of value, and debt collectors had taken the rest, emptying her bank account through a court judgment, garnishing her wages until she could no longer make rent, forcing them into this $50 a night room they could not afford. Among the pile of demands, one envelope stood out. It was cream-colored, heavy stock, with the return address of Morrison & Clark Legal Associates in Billings, Montana. The letter inside informed her that her aunt, Margaret Holloway, had passed away 6 weeks ago and had named Emma as the sole beneficiary of her estate. For one wild moment, Emma's heart leaped with hope so fierce it was painful, an inheritance, a way out. But as she read further, that hope died. The estate consisted of one property, a house on 40 acres in rural Montana, currently condemned by the county due to structural failure and code violations. The letter included several photographs. Emma looked at them under the harsh lamplight and felt something inside her crack. The house was a ruin, a skeleton of dark logs with a collapsed porch, broken windows like empty eye sockets, and a roof that sagged in the middle like the spine of a dying animal. The property assessment valued the land at $12,000, but noted that demolition costs and clearing the liens would exceed $15,000. The lawyer's note was succinct. Given your current financial situation, I would strongly advise signing the quitclaim deed enclosed and transferring the property to the county. This will release you from any further tax obligations or liability. I am sorry for your loss. Emma stared at the photographs for a long time, at the sad wreckage of a house left to her by an aunt she had met perhaps twice at family gatherings that were more duty than affection. She remembered Margaret as a tall, quiet woman with sharp eyes and calloused hands, someone who had seemed out of place at the formal dinners, someone who had left early and driven back to Montana in a truck that looked older than Emma herself. The memory was faint, a ghost of a connection to a stranger. But as she sat in that motel room that smelled of failure, looking at her sleeping daughter whose medical debt had destroyed their lives, Emma found herself staring at those photographs with an intensity that surprised her. It was worthless, the lawyer said, condemned, a burden she should walk away from. Yet something in the images, in the vast emptiness of the Montana landscape stretching behind that broken house, called to her with a voice she did not understand. They had nothing left to lose and nowhere left to fall. Emma sat awake through the night, the photographs of the ruined Montana house spread before her like tarot cards promising an uncertain fate. The motel manager had slipped the final eviction notice under her door 3 days ago, giving her exactly 1 week to vacate or face removal. She had 7 days, $112, and no prospects in a city that had destroyed her. The lawyer's quitclaim deed waited for her signature that would make the problem disappear along with any chance of having something that belonged to them. At dawn, with Lily still sleeping, Emma made a decision that felt less like a choice and more like the only move left. They would go to Montana. It was insane, reckless, the kind of desperate gamble people made in their final moments before going under. But sanity had not saved her, and careful planning had only led to this room. She woke Lily gently and told her they were going on an adventure, watching her daughter's eyes fill with cautious hope and barely hidden fear. They spent the morning selling everything. Their suitcases of clothes went to a second-hand shop for $30. Emma's barely working laptop brought $45 from a pawn shop. And the small gold locket from her confirmation sold for $85 to a jewelry buyer who offered half its worth, knowing desperation when he saw it. With $372, Emma walked into a used car lot where vehicles went to die. The salesman showed her a 1,998 Honda Civic with 230,000 miles, a cracked windshield, and an engine that sounded like it was coughing up metal. He wanted $500. She had $372. They settled on $350, with him throwing in a half-empty bottle of oil and advice to check the fluid every 100 miles. She filled the tank with $40 of gas, bought water and granola bars for $12, and used $10 to print a map because her phone's data had been shut off months ago. They left Sacramento at noon on a Tuesday, the Civic rattling down Interstate 80 with everything they owned in a garbage bag in the trunk. Lily sat in the passenger seat, her small face pressed against the window, watching California blur past with the wide, frightened eyes of a child who understood they were leaving everything familiar and driving towards something unknown. Emma squeezed her daughter's hand, feeling the small fingers grip back with a trust that was both a gift and a terrible weight. They drove through the long afternoon into evening, the engine making increasingly concerning sounds, the landscape transforming from California's golden brown to Nevada's high desert, and then the beginning of mountains. Emma stopped only for gas and bathroom breaks, rationing their money, sleeping in the car at rest stops where the night was cold and full of semi-trucks and other travelers fleeing their own disasters. On the third day, with the last $20 buying just enough fuel, they crossed into Montana, and Emma felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of the vice that had been squeezing her heart for 2 years. The mountains rose around them like ancient guardians, their peaks crowned with snow even in late spring, and the sky opened into a blue so vast and clean it hurt to look at. They were driving toward a condemned house on 40 acres of land no one wanted, toward a future that was completely uncertain. But for the first time since the medical bills had started arriving, Emma felt like they were moving toward something instead of just running away. The town of Pinewood appeared on the horizon like something from a faded postcard, a single main street lined with weathered storefronts nestled in a valley where the mountains pressed close on 3 sides. Emma guided the struggling Civic down the empty road, noting the hardware store with its hand-painted sign, the diner with checkered curtains in the windows, and the general store that seemed to be the heart of what little commerce existed in this forgotten corner of Montana. It was late afternoon, the sun casting long shadows across the cracked pavement, and the town had the quiet, watchful quality of a place where strangers were noticed and discussed. She parked in front of Garrett's general store, its wooden porch sagging slightly but sturdy, and told Lily to wait in the car while she went inside to ask for directions to the property. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, and the smell of coffee, old wood, and packaged goods enveloped her. The interior was cramped but organized, shelves stocked with everything from canned soup to fishing line, the kind of place that served as grocery store, hardware shop, and community gathering point all at once. Behind the counter stood an elderly man with a weathered face and kind eyes. His flannel shirt rolled up at the sleeves, and he looked up from the newspaper he was reading with a smile that seemed genuine. "Afternoon," he said, his voice carrying the slow, deliberate cadence of someone who had never been in a hurry. "You look like you've been on the road a while. Can I help you find something?" Emma approached the counter, pulling the lawyer's letter from her jacket pocket. "I'm looking for directions. I inherited some property around here from my aunt, Margaret Holloway. The address is on this letter, but I don't have GPS and the map I have isn't detailed enough." The moment she said the name, the change was immediate and unmistakable. The friendly warmth drained from Mr. Garrett's face like water from a broken dam, his smile freezing and then disappearing entirely. His eyes, which had been welcoming just seconds before, went flat and distant. He set down his coffee cup with a hand that was no longer steady and took the letter from her, reading the address even though she could tell he already knew exactly which property she meant. The silence stretched out, heavy and uncomfortable, and Emma became aware that the two other customers in the store, a middle-aged woman examining canned vegetables and a younger man near the back looking at tools, had both stopped what they were doing and were watching her with expressions she could not quite read. "The Holloway place," Mr. Garrett said finally, his voice stripped of its earlier warmth. He handed the letter back to her as if it were contaminated. "You're Margaret's niece?" Emma nodded. "I am. I only met her a couple times when I was young. I didn't know her well." "Mr." Garrett studied her for a long moment, and something that might have been pity flickered across his weathered features. "No one goes out to the Holloway place anymore," he said quietly. "Hasn't been anyone there since your aunt passed 6 weeks back. The county condemned the house. You planning to sign it over?" Emma felt her spine stiffen. "I'm planning to see it first. Can you tell me how to get there?" The elderly man shook his head slowly, not in refusal but in something closer to resignation or warning. "Your aunt, she was a good woman, but she asked too many questions. Stirred up trouble where it didn't need stirring. Some folks around here weren't too pleased about that." He pulled a piece of paper from under the counter and drew a rough map, his hands moving with reluctance. "You take Route 12 east for about 8 miles, then turn left on Forest Service Road 47. It's not marked anymore. Another 6 miles, and you'll see the turnoff. Road's grown over pretty bad." He pushed the map across the counter, but his eyes held hers with an intensity that made her stomach clench. "If you're smart, you'll look at that place, sign whatever papers that lawyer sent you, and go back to wherever you came from. That's free advice." The woman by the canned goods had moved closer, and she spoke up, her voice tight. "My husband works for the county. He says that property's got more liens on it than the land's worth. Nothing but trouble," the younger man at the back added without looking up. "Some places are better left alone." Emma took the hand-drawn map, feeling the weight of their collective warning pressing down on her like the mountain air. She thanked Mr. Garrett and walked back out into the afternoon sun, her heart pounding with a fear that was different from the fear of debt collectors and eviction notices. This was the fear of walking into something she did not understand, something the people who lived here were afraid to speak about directly. She climbed back into the Civic where Lily waited, and as she started the engine, she glanced back at the store and saw all 3 of them standing at the window, watching her leave with faces that said she had just made a terrible mistake. Forest Service Road 47 was less a road and more a suggestion of where a road had once been. 2 faint ruts carved through dense undergrowth and crowded on both sides by pine trees that seemed to lean inward as if trying to reclaim the passage entirely. The Civic bounced and scraped over rocks and fallen branches, its suspension groaning, and Emma drove slowly, gripping the steering wheel with white knuckles as Lily held the door handle. They traveled like this for 20 minutes, the forest growing thicker, until the trees suddenly opened up and Emma's foot hit the brake. Before them lay 40 acres of Montana wilderness, and it was the most beautiful thing Emma had seen in years. The land rolled gently toward distant mountains, covered in ponderosa pine and Douglas fir, their branches swaying in the breeze. A creek, crystal clear and fast-moving, cut through the eastern edge, its water catching the afternoon sun and throwing diamonds of light into the air. Wildflower meadows, thick with lupine and Indian paintbrush, spread in patches of purple and red between the trees, and the sky above was so vast and blue it seemed to swallow the horizon. In the center of this natural cathedral stood the house, and it was exactly as broken as the photographs had promised. The roof sagged so dramatically Emma wondered how it was still standing at all, and several logs had rotted through, leaving gaps like missing teeth. The porch had collapsed on the left side, and the windows were shattered, their frames hanging at odd angles. The stone chimney, miraculously, still stood straight and tall, the only part with any structural integrity left. They stepped out into the mountain silence, a quiet so profound after days of highway noise it felt like a physical presence. The air was cool and clean, scented with pine resin and wildflowers, and Emma stood there breathing it in, feeling something unknot in her chest. Lily walked forward slowly, her sneakers crunching on gravel and pine needles, her head tilted back to take in the mountains and endless sky. She moved toward the house cautiously, but then her attention was caught by something off to the side. Under a massive oak tree, whose branches spread like protective arms, stood the rusted remnants of a child's swing, its chains orange with age, but still attached to a thick branch 20 feet up. Lily approached it reverently, touching the worn wooden seat, and looked back at her mother with the first genuine smile Emma had seen in months. Emma walked the perimeter, while Lily examined the swing. She could see where her aunt had planted a garden, now overgrown but still showing the bones of careful planning. She could see a shed in the distance, its door padlocked, and what looked like a stone-lined fire pit near the creek. She walked up to the house and peered through a broken window into the gloom inside. The interior was chaos, dust, collapsed furniture and debris, but she could see the massive stone fireplace dominating one wall, and above it, carved into the mantel, were words she had to squint to read. "The truth will not stay buried." Emma stood there, her hand on the rough log wall, looking out at the 40 acres that now belonged to her, and felt something unexpected. It was not hope exactly, nothing as simple or fragile as that, but it was a connection, a sense that this place, broken and abandoned as it was somehow meant to be theirs. Her aunt had lived here, had carved those words into stone, had left this land to a niece she barely knew. Why? Standing in the fading afternoon light with her daughter's laughter floating over from the rusty swing, Emma felt the first stirrings of a question that would change everything. What had Margaret Holloway been trying to protect? They made camp inside the ruins as the sun dipped below the mountains, and the temperature dropped with the sudden severity of high-altitude nights. Emma had retrieved their sleeping bags from the car, along with the last of their food, and she cleared a space on the floor near the massive stone fireplace where the floorboards seemed most solid. She did not dare light a fire in the hearth, uncertain if the chimney was safe after years of neglect. So they huddled together in their sleeping bags, eating granola bars and drinking bottled water, while the last light faded from the broken windows. As darkness settled over the property, the house came alive with sounds. The wind, which had been a gentle presence during the day, picked up with the falling temperature and began to move through the structure like a living thing, finding every crack and gap and making the old logs groan and creak. The roof timbers shifted overhead with sounds like footsteps, and somewhere in the back of the house something loose banged rhythmically against wood. Lily pressed close to Emma, her small body tense, and Emma wrapped an arm around her daughter and told her it was just the house settling, just the wind, nothing to be afraid of, even as her own heart beat faster in the darkness. Unable to sleep, Emma clicked on the small flashlight she had bought at a gas station and began to explore the debris around them. The floor was covered in layers of dust, broken glass, and the detritus of abandonment, but as she carefully sifted through the chaos, she began to find the remnants of her aunt's life. There were books, their pages swollen with moisture and age, stacked against one wall. Emma pulled them closer and read their spines by flashlight. Environmental toxicology, groundwater contamination and analysis, industrial pollution in rural communities. These were not the books of a simple recluse living off the land, but the library of someone conducting serious research. Beneath the books she found rolled maps, and when she carefully unrolled one, she saw it was a detailed geological survey of the region, with specific areas circled in red pen and notations in a precise, angular handwriting. But it was the newspaper clippings that made Emma's breath catch. They were carefully cut from what looked like the local Pinewood Gazette, dating back over 5 years, and they covered mundane topics: a county commissioner's re-election, the opening of a new processing facility by Cascade Industries, a feature on local ranching families. Someone had collected these articles deliberately, and in the margins, in that same precise handwriting, her aunt had written notes that transformed the innocent stories into something darker. Next to an article about increased jobs at the Cascade Industries plant, Margaret had written, "Water samples, arsenic levels rising, EPA standards exceeded." Beside a piece about a community health fair, the note read, 3 more families sick, same symptoms, all downstream. An article celebrating the county's economic growth had a single word scrawled across it in angry pen strokes: "They're lying." Emma sat back on her heels. The clippings spread before her in the flashlight's beam, her mind racing. Her aunt had not been a harmless eccentric living in isolation, and this property was not just a condemned house on worthless land. Margaret Holloway had been investigating something, tracking something, documenting a pattern that someone had not wanted documented. The cold warning from Mr. Garrett echoed in Emma's memory. She asked too many questions. The strange, fearful looks from the townspeople. The overly generous offers that would surely come if anyone knew she was here. This land was not worthless, it was dangerous, and her aunt had died protecting whatever truth she had uncovered. Emma looked over at Lily, finally asleep despite the groaning house, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain cold. They had come here with nothing, running from debt and desperation, and they had stumbled into something far more threatening than financial ruin. The morning sun broke over the mountains, flooding the valley with light that seemed to expose every broken piece of the house and every shadow that might hold secrets. Emma woke stiff and cold, her back aching from sleeping on the hard floor, but Lily was already up and standing at the broken window, looking out at the property with the fearless curiosity of a child who had decided this strange, ruined place was an adventure rather than a disaster. After a meager breakfast of the last granola bars, Lily asked if she could explore outside, and Emma, seeing no harm in it under the bright morning sun, agreed, watching from the porch as her daughter ran toward the creek and then veered off toward the tree line. It was Lily who found the shed, calling out with excitement from a dense stand of pines about 100 yards from the house. Emma walked over to find her daughter standing in front of a structure she had not noticed the day before. So completely was it camouflaged by overhanging branches and a thick curtain of wild vines. It was not large, perhaps 10 by 12 feet, built of the same weathered logs as the house but in far better condition, and its single door was secured with a heavy padlock that looked new, industrial grade, completely out of place on this abandoned property. Emma felt a prickle of unease as she examined the lock, wondering why her aunt would have secured this small outbuilding so carefully when the house itself stood open and rotting. She went back to the car and retrieved the tire iron from the trunk, and with Lily watching from a safe distance, she wedged it behind the hasp and pulled with all her strength until the screws tore free from the old wood with a screech of protest. The door swung open, and the smell that wafted out was not decay or animal nests, but something chemical and sterile, the scent of a workspace that had been used recently and seriously. Emma stepped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dimness, and stopped dead. The interior of the shed was a makeshift laboratory, organized with the same meticulous care evident in the newspaper clippings she had found the night before. Along one wall stood a workbench made from thick planks, and on it sat an array of equipment: a portable spectrometer, pH meters, a small microscope, testing kits still in their packaging, and a rack of glass sample bottles, each one carefully labeled with a date, time, and GPS coordinates. Emma picked up one of the bottles, its contents a murky brown liquid, and read the label: Creek, downstream from processing plant, June 3, 2023. Another bottle, this one containing clearer water: Spring, north property line, June 10, 2023. There were dozens of them, a systematic collection spanning what looked like 5 years. On the opposite wall hung photographs, pinned to a corkboard like evidence in a detective's investigation. They showed industrial buildings, massive pipes discharging water into streams, aerial views of what looked like waste containment ponds, and close-ups of dead fish floating belly up in contaminated creeks. In the corner stood a filing cabinet, olive green and military surplus, secured with a combination lock that Emma could not open. She pulled at the drawers, but they would not budge. Next to the cabinet was a small desk, and on it sat a calendar, the kind with large squares for notes. Emma flipped through it, her heart beginning to pound. The last entry was dated April 15th, just 6 weeks ago. Final samples collected, levels confirm pattern, ready to contact EPA. Her aunt had died on April 18th, just 3 days later, of what the lawyer's letter had described as a sudden heart attack. Emma stood in that dim shed, surrounded by the evidence of years of careful investigation, and her instincts, honed by years of fighting for her daughter's survival, screamed that Margaret Holloway had not died of natural causes. Emma was still standing in the shed, her mind reeling from the implications of what she had found, when she heard the sound of an engine approaching, a smooth, powerful purr that was nothing like the struggling rattle of her own dying Civic. She stepped out into the sunlight and saw a vehicle coming up the overgrown road, navigating the ruts and obstacles with ease. It was a massive black SUV, brand new and gleaming, its chrome catching the sun, and it looked as out of place in this wilderness as a diamond in a coal mine. The vehicle pulled to a stop near the house, and a man stepped out, closing the door with a solid, expensive thunk. He was perhaps 45, tall and trim in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Emma had earned in 6 months at her best job, and his shoes, polished to a mirror shine, were completely impractical for the rough terrain. His hair was styled with product, his smile was professional and practiced, and everything about him radiated the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about money. He approached Emma with his hand extended, and she noticed Lily had stopped playing and was watching from near the old swing, her instincts telling her this man was not a friend. "You must be Emma Holloway," he said, his voice smooth and friendly. "I'm Derek Vance, regional manager for Cascade Industries. I heard through the county office that Margaret's property had finally been inherited, and I wanted to come by personally to introduce myself and offer my condolences." "Your aunt was quite a character." Emma shook his hand briefly, noting the grip was firm and calculated, designed to convey authority. "Thank you. How did you know I was here?" His smile never wavered. "Small town, word travels fast. I'm sure you've seen the condition of the property. The house is condemned, and I understand you're in a difficult position. I wanted to make you an offer that might help solve your problem." He pulled a leather portfolio from his SUV and opened it, showing her official-looking documents. "Cascade Industries has been acquiring land in this valley for a development project, and while your aunt was not interested in selling, I'm hoping you might be more practical. I'm prepared to offer you $75,000 cash for this property. That's triple what similar parcels have sold for. You could sign today, have a check by tomorrow, and be on your way to starting fresh somewhere that isn't, well, this." He gestured at the ruined house with a look of polite distaste. Emma felt her pulse quicken. $75,000 would erase her debt, give her and Lily a new start, change everything. But she thought of the laboratory in the shed, the meticulous notes, the calendar entry just days before her aunt's death. She thought of Mr. Garrett's warning and the fear in the townspeople's eyes. "Why does a mining company want this particular piece of land?" she asked carefully. Derek's smile tightened just a fraction. "We're assembling a large parcel for environmental mitigation, creating buffer zones around our operations. Standard corporate responsibility. This property happens to sit in a key location." It was a smooth lie, delivered with practiced ease, but it was still a lie. Emma could feel it. "I'll need time to think about it," she said. Derek's expression shifted, the friendly mask slipping just enough to show something harder beneath. "Of course. But I should mention this offer is time-sensitive. I need your answer within 48 hours. After that, the offer will be withdrawn." He handed her a business card, thick and embossed. "My direct number. Call me anytime, day or night." "I really hope we can work something out, Miss Holloway. It would be in everyone's best interest." He climbed back into his SUV and drove away, leaving deep tire tracks in the mud. Emma stood watching until he disappeared down the overgrown road, then looked at the business card in her hand. She was about to put it in her pocket when she noticed something on the back, written in a different hand, in blue ink that looked hasty and urgent. "Take the money and leave." The business card, with its cryptic warning, sat on the workbench in the shed like a piece of evidence at a crime scene, and Emma stared at it for a long moment before making her decision. $75,000 was more money than she had ever imagined having, enough to solve every problem that had driven them to this place. But the warning on the card and Derek Vance's two smooth lies told her that accepting it would mean walking away from something her aunt had died protecting. She needed to know what was in that locked filing cabinet. She sent Lily back to the house with instructions to stay on the porch where Emma could see her. Then she returned to the shed with the tire iron and a hammer she had found in the ruins. The filing cabinet was solid, military grade, but the lock was its weak point. She wedged the tire iron into the gap between the top drawer and the frame and struck it repeatedly with the hammer, the metallic clanging echoing across the property. After 10 minutes of sustained effort, the lock mechanism broke with a satisfying crack, and the drawer slid open. Inside was order, the kind of meticulous organization that spoke of a scientific mind building an airtight case. The files were arranged chronologically, each one in a labeled folder with dates spanning from 2018 to just weeks before Margaret's death. Emma pulled out the first folder and opened it on the workbench. It contained laboratory reports from an independent testing facility in Bozeman, and the results made her stomach clench. Sample after sample showed dangerous levels of arsenic, lead, chromium, and industrial solvents in water sources throughout the valley, all of them exceeding EPA safety standards by margins that were not just concerning but catastrophic. The second folder contained something even more damning: internal company documents, emails, and memos on Cascade Industries letterhead. Emma had no idea how her aunt had obtained them, but they were smoking guns. Communications between executives discussing disposal shortcuts, acceptable contamination levels, and managing regulatory oversight. One email from Derek Vance himself, dated 2 years ago, discussed neutralizing the Holloway problem and suggested that continued financial and legal pressure should encourage voluntary relocation. The third folder was the hardest to look at. It contained photographs of children, local kids with haunted eyes and sallow skin, some with visible rashes, others looking gaunt and exhausted. Clipped to each photo was a medical summary: chronic fatigue, developmental delays, mysterious blood disorders that doctors could not explain. Emma recognized one of the families from the newspaper clippings, a ranching family that lived downstream from the processing plant. These were not abstract statistics, they were real children being slowly poisoned. The bottom drawer contained a large rolled map, and when Emma spread it across the workbench, she saw it was a detailed topographical survey of the entire region with overlays in different colored inks. Red marked contamination sites where her aunt had taken samples. Blue showed the water flow patterns, creeks and underground aquifers spreading out from a central point. Green marked the homes of affected families. And at the center, like a spider in a web, was the Cascade Industries processing facility, with arrows showing discharge points that fed directly into the watershed that supplied drinking water to half the valley. Her aunt had not just been investigating, she had been building a prosecutable case, and this map was the visual evidence that would make it undeniable. The final item in the cabinet was a journal, leather-bound and filled with Margaret's precise handwriting. Emma flipped to the last entry, dated April 14th, 4 days before her aunt's death. The words were short, final, and chilling. Vance visited today, made threats thinly veiled as concern. They know I've been collecting evidence. I've hidden copies in 3 locations. The EPA contact I've been working with, Dr. Reeves, goes dark whenever I mention Cascade by name. Possible corruption there too. No one local can be trusted. If anything happens to me, someone must finish this. The children are getting sicker. Time is running out. Emma stood in the shed, surrounded by 5 years of meticulous investigation, staring at her aunt's final words. Margaret Holloway had known she was in danger and had kept working anyway, had kept documenting, had kept fighting because children were being poisoned and no one with power was willing to stop it. And now that fight, that terrible burden, had fallen to Emma. Emma had barely finished reading her aunt's final journal entry when she heard another vehicle approaching, this one lacking the expensive purr of Derek Vance's SUV, but carrying its own kind of authority. A white pickup truck with Flathead County Building Inspection stenciled on the door pulled into the clearing, and a heavy-set man in his 50s climbed out, carrying a clipboard and wearing the bored expression of a bureaucrat on a routine call. He introduced himself as Inspector Dale Morrison and informed Emma he was there to conduct a safety inspection of the property following a complaint filed with the county office. Emma asked who had filed the complaint, and he told her complaints could be anonymous, then walked around the house making notes with exaggerated care, photographing the collapsed porch, the sagging roof, the broken windows. After 20 minutes of this performance, he returned to where Emma stood with Lily and handed her official-looking document, stamped with the county seal. It was a demolition order, citing multiple code violations and structural failures, giving her 30 days to either bring the property up to code at an estimated cost of $80,000 or demolish the structure entirely. Morrison's voice was flat and rehearsed as he explained that failure to comply would result in the county demolishing the house and placing a lien on the property for costs. Then his eyes shifted to Lily, and his tone changed, taking on an edge of false concern. I notice you have a minor child living in these conditions. No running water, no electricity, structural hazards everywhere. That's a matter for Child Protective Services. I'm obligated to file a report. Emma felt ice flood her veins. This was the same playbook her aunt had faced, the coordinated harassment disguised as legitimate concern, the bureaucratic weapons wielded by people who knew exactly what they were doing. We're camping temporarily while I assess the property, Emma said, keeping her voice steady. We have supplies, we're safe, and we'll be making decisions about our next step soon. Morrison shrugged as if her explanations meant nothing. I'm just doing my job, ma'am. You have 30 days on the demolition order. The CPS report will be filed by end of business today. He climbed back into his truck and left. And Emma stood there holding the papers that were designed to pressure her into selling, into taking Derek Vance's offer and disappearing. She thought of the email she had found in the filing cabinet about continued financial and legal pressure, and she understood with perfect clarity that this was a system, a machine designed to grind down anyone who threatened Cascade Industries' interests. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep in her sleeping bag by the cold fireplace, Emma lay awake listening to the sounds of the forest. It was past midnight when she heard it, a sound that did not belong, the soft crunch of footsteps on gravel trying and failing to be silent. She rose quietly and moved to the broken window, peering out into the darkness. She saw nothing but shadows and moonlight, but then she heard it again, closer to where the Civic was parked. A flashlight beam, quickly extinguished, the sound of metal on metal, then footsteps retreating quickly, and the distant sound of a vehicle engine starting somewhere down the overgrown road, running without headlights. Emma waited until she was sure they were gone, then crept outside with her own flashlight. The Civic sat in the moonlight, and even from a distance she could see it listing to one side. All 4 tires had been slashed, clean cuts that had let the air out in silent hisses. Under the windshield wiper was a folded piece of paper, and Emma's hands shook as she opened it. The message was written in block letters, deliberately anonymous. "You have 1 week. Take the offer." With the Civic disabled and no money to replace the tires, Emma had no choice but to walk into town the next morning, a 6-mile trek with Lily complaining about her feet after the first hour. They reached Pinewood by mid-morning, and Emma headed directly to the small public library, a brick building tucked between the post office and a closed hardware store. Inside, the library was cool and quiet, smelling of old books and accumulated silence. Emma settled Lily in the children's section with picture books, then moved to the public computer terminals and began searching for information about Cascade Industries. The company's website was slick and professional, full of language about sustainable practices and environmental stewardship. But when Emma dug deeper into news archives and regulatory databases, she found a different story. Fines paid quietly in 3 other states for environmental violations, lawsuits settled with non-disclosure agreements, and a pattern of moving operations just ahead of serious regulatory scrutiny. She was so absorbed that she did not notice the librarian approaching until a quiet voice said, "You're Margaret's niece." Emma looked up to find a woman in her early 30s with intelligent dark eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Her name tag read, Sarah Chen, head librarian. Sarah's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Don't react. What you're researching is dangerous. Meet me behind the building in 5 minutes. Use the back door near the restrooms." Before Emma could respond, Sarah walked away. Emma's heart pounded as she closed the browser windows, collected Lily, and made her way to the back exit. She pushed open the rear door into an alley where Sarah was already waiting, smoking a cigarette with shaking hands. "Your aunt and I were friends," Sarah said without preamble. "She used to come here twice a week, researching, printing documents. She told me what she was finding, and I believed her when no one else would." Tears gathered in Sarah's eyes. "When they said she died of a heart attack, I knew it was a lie. Margaret was healthy. She hiked 10 miles every other day. But I was terrified. I have a daughter, a job." I kept quiet. Emma felt sympathy surge through her. "You're not a coward." Sarah pulled a manila envelope from inside her jacket. "Margaret gave me this 2 months before she died. She made me promise that if anything happened to her, I'd give it to whoever inherited the property. She said family would come eventually." Emma took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside were photocopies of canceled checks, bank statements, and handwritten ledgers. The checks were from Cascade Industries, made out to various officials, the county commissioner, the sheriff, Inspector Morrison, and 3 county health board members. The amounts were carefully calculated to avoid automatic reporting requirements, but substantial enough to buy loyalty and silence. The ledgers showed systematic payments going back 7 years. "She got these from someone inside the company," Sarah said quietly. "This is proof of corruption at every level. Your aunt was going to take this to the state attorney general, but she never got the chance." Emma looked at Sarah. "Why give me this now? You could have destroyed it, stayed safe." Sarah's expression hardened. "Because 3 more kids got sick this month. Because I see their parents at story hour and watch them try to smile while their children are dying. Because your aunt was right, and someone has to finish what she started." She stubbed out her cigarette. "Be careful, they're watching you." Emma tucked the envelope inside her jacket, holding the next piece of her aunt's carefully constructed case. Armed with her aunt's map showing the affected families, Emma spent the next day visiting the homes that bordered the contaminated creek. leaving Lily with Sarah at the library where she would be safe and occupied. The first house belonged to the Kowalski family, a weathered ranch home with peeling paint and a yard full of broken equipment. Maria Kowalski answered the door with the exhausted eyes of a mother who had stopped sleeping years ago, and when Emma explained who she was, the woman's face crumpled with something between hope and fear. Inside, Emma met 8-year-old Ethan, a thin boy with dark circles under his eyes and a rash covering his forearms that looked angry and inflamed. Maria explained that Ethan had been healthy until 3 years ago. Then suddenly he could barely get out of bed, his energy gone, his development stalling. The doctors Cascade Industries had said it was psychological, that Ethan was anxious and needed therapy, but Maria knew her son, and this was not anxiety. The second family, the Hendersons, lived in a trailer at the end of a dirt road, their property backing directly onto the creek that ran crystal clear and deadly. Both of their children, twin girls aged 6, had the same symptoms: chronic fatigue, mysterious rashes, and developmental delays that had appeared suddenly 2 years ago. The company doctors had told them it was genetic, that twins often shared conditions, but neither parent had family history of anything like this. Tom Henderson, a ranch hand who worked 70 hours a week to pay medical bills, showed Emma the stack of invoices from specialists who found nothing, prescribed nothing that helped, and sent them home with pamphlets about accepting chronic illness. The third visit was the hardest. The Chen family lived in a small cabin, and their daughter Mia was only 5 years old, so weak she spent most days in bed, her skin covered in lesions that would not heal. Her mother, Linda Chen, was Sarah's cousin, and when Emma explained that she had her aunt's research and was going to continue the investigation, Linda's composure shattered. She began to cry, deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from a place of grief so profound it had no bottom. "Your aunt came here 2 years ago," Linda said through her tears. "She tested our water, she showed us the results, she told us it was poison from the plant upstream. She said she was going to get help, that she was going to make them pay for what they'd done to our babies. She gave us hope for the first time since Mia got sick." Linda grabbed Emma's hands, her grip desperate. 3 weeks later, Margaret was dead. They said heart attack, but we knew. Everyone knew. They killed her to keep her quiet, and we were too afraid to say anything because if they could kill her, they could kill us too. So we just watched our children get sicker, while the company doctors told us we were imagining things, that we were bad parents looking for someone to blame. Emma sat in that cabin, holding a grieving mother's hands, looking at a 5-year-old girl who should have been playing outside but instead lay in bed too weak to stand, and felt a rage so pure and cold it was clarifying. These families had been poisoned, gaslit, isolated, and terrorized into silence. Her aunt had tried to save them, and had been murdered for it. The company had calculated that poor, isolated families with sick children were acceptable casualties, people without the resources or power to fight back. But they had miscalculated one thing. Margaret Holloway had left behind not just evidence but a successor, and Emma had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Emma returned to the property that evening with new understanding, and she studied her aunt's maps with fresh eyes, looking not just at contamination patterns but at the property itself. There was a reason Cascade Industries wanted this 40 acres so desperately. Her aunt's notes mentioned primary archive locations secure, off-grid, natural protection. And on the largest topographical map was a small red X in the far northwest corner with the notation Vault. Emma waited until morning, then told Lily to stay near the house and set off through the dense pine forest following the coordinates. The terrain grew steeper as she climbed, the trees thinning, and after 40 minutes of difficult hiking she reached an outcropping of limestone that rose like a natural fortress. At first she saw nothing but rock and scrub brush, but then she noticed a narrow opening in the stone, partially concealed by a carefully positioned boulder and wild vines. Emma squeezed through the gap and found herself in a natural cave, the entrance opening into a larger chamber lit by dim shafts of sunlight through cracks in the rock above. The temperature inside was cool and constant, and as her eyes adjusted, she saw what her aunt had created. Against the far wall stood a solar-powered refrigeration unit, its panels connected to cables running up through a natural chimney to a hidden array on the surface. The unit hummed softly, still operational, and inside were rows of glass sample bottles, hundreds of them, each labeled with Margaret's precise handwriting. These were the original water samples, preserved at proper temperature, uncontaminated and unaltered, scientific evidence that could not be disputed or destroyed. Next to the unit sat a metal case, waterproof and sealed, and inside Emma found 6 backup hard drives, each labeled with dates and contents. Lab reports 2018 to 2023. Company documents, photographic evidence, medical records, financial records, bribes. Her aunt had created redundancy, ensuring that even if one copy was destroyed, others would survive. But it was the final item that made Emma's throat tighten. Sitting on a flat stone was a sealed envelope with the words, "To whoever inherits this burden." Emma opened it with trembling hands. The letter was dated 1 week before Margaret's death. "If you are reading this, I am likely dead, and Cascade Industries likely killed me. Do not believe it was natural causes. I am healthy, I am careful, and I know what they are capable of." This cave contains 5 years of evidence, proving systematic poisoning of local water supplies, corruption of public officials, and corporate negligence that has harmed dozens of children. I chose this property because of this cave, because it is on the highest point of the watershed, and because Cascade Industries has been illegally dumping toxic waste upstream. They want this land because the cave system connects to their disposal site. If they own this property, they control access to the evidence of their crimes. Do not sell, do not negotiate. Take this evidence to the federal EPA, bypass all local authorities, and make them pay for what they have done. The children are dying. Someone must be their voice. I chose you because you are family, because you will understand what it means to protect the innocent, and because I believe you have the strength to finish what I started. I am sorry to burden you with this, but I am not sorry I fought. Neither should you be. Emma sat in the cool darkness, surrounded by years of her aunt's work, holding a letter from a woman who had faced death and chosen courage anyway, and she understood this was no longer about money or survival, or even abstract justice. This was about sick children and poisoned water in a fight her aunt had died fighting, and Emma would be damned if she walked away now. Derek Vance returned 2 days later, and this time there was no pretense of a friendly visit. His black SUV pulled up just after noon, and he stepped out wearing the same expensive suit but with an expression that was harder, more calculating. Emma met him on the porch, keeping herself between him and the house where Lily was eating lunch. He wasted no time with pleasantries. "I'm here with a final offer, Miss Holloway. My company is prepared to pay you $150,000 for this property. That's double my previous offer." He pulled out a leather folder containing official documents. "There are conditions. You'll sign a non-disclosure agreement preventing you from discussing anything related to this property, Cascade Industries, or water quality in this region. You'll also agree to leave Montana permanently and not return for 10 years. The check clears in 24 hours. Emma looked at the documents without touching them. "And if I refuse?" Derek's professional mask cracked, revealing something cold beneath. "Then you'll discover how difficult life can become. That demolition order will be enforced in full. The county will bulldoze this structure, and you'll be billed for costs exceeding the land's value. Your car will be impounded tomorrow for unpaid parking tickets." Emma started to protest, but he held up a hand. "Tickets that will appear in the system with valid dates. Documentation is easy when you have the right people on payroll. Without a vehicle, you'll be stranded here with no way to town, no way to buy food, no way to leave." His voice dropped lower, more menacing. "And then there's Child Protective Services. They'll receive multiple reports about a minor living in a condemned structure with no running water, no electricity, and an unstable mother refusing to provide adequate shelter. They'll investigate thoroughly, and given your financial situation and lack of stable housing, they'll have legitimate concerns about your fitness as a parent." Emma felt her blood run cold. "You can't take my daughter." Derek smiled like a predator. "I don't have to. The system will. You'll spend months fighting through family court, hiring lawyers you can't afford, while Lily is in foster care, confused and frightened, wondering why her mother won't come get her. Is that what you want?" He stepped closer, his voice becoming almost gentle, which made it more threatening. "I'm giving you a way out. Take the money, sign the papers, and build a life somewhere else. Your daughter gets stability, gets a real home, gets a mother who isn't fighting battles she cannot win. This property is worthless to you, but to my company it has strategic value. This is business, nothing personal." Emma met his eyes, seeing the absolute certainty that he held all the power. "I need time to think." Derek shook his head. "No more time. You have until tomorrow at noon to sign these documents. After that, the offer is withdrawn permanently. And everything I've described will happen. The demolition, the impound, the CPS investigation. It's all already in motion. Signing stops it. Refusing lets it proceed. He placed the folder on the porch railing. Think about your daughter, Miss Holloway. Think about what's best for her. Is a pile of dirt and a ruined house worth losing her? He walked back to his SUV and drove away, leaving Emma standing on the porch with the documents and 24 hours to choose between her daughter's safety and her aunt's dying wish. Emma had taken Lily into town the next morning, needing space to think about Derek's ultimatum and wanting to keep her daughter away from the oppressive weight of the decision she faced. They spent 3 hours at the library, where Sarah let Lily play educational games on a computer while Emma sat at a table staring at the non-disclosure agreement without seeing it. When they returned to the property in the late afternoon, Emma knew immediately that something was wrong. The shed door, which she had secured with a new padlock just 2 days ago, was hanging open, the lock cut cleanly with bolt cutters that lay discarded in the grass. Emma's heart began to pound as she told Lily to stay in the car and approached the shed slowly, her phone in her hand ready to call for help even though she knew the local sheriff was on Cascade's payroll. Inside, the destruction was total and methodical. The workbench had been overturned, the laboratory equipment smashed with deliberate violence. The spectrometer was in pieces on the floor, the microscope shattered, the testing kits torn open and their contents scattered. The rack of sample bottles her aunt had collected over 5 years lay in glittering fragments, the precious water samples soaking into the dirt floor, evidence destroyed beyond recovery. The filing cabinet had been pried open and emptied, every folder removed, every document taken. But worse than the physical destruction was what else was missing: her aunt's laptop computer, which Emma had found under the workbench, and the original journals. Margaret's handwritten record of 5 years of investigation. They were gone, stolen, and with them went the narrative that made sense of all the other evidence. Emma stood in the ruins of her aunt's laboratory, her hands shaking with rage and fear, but beneath the anger was a cold calculation. The thieves had been thorough, but they had not found everything because Emma, following some instinct she did not fully understand, had moved the most critical evidence to the cave 2 days ago. The backup hard drives, the preserved water samples in the solar refrigeration unit, the letter from her aunt, all of it was still safe, hidden in stone where these corporate thugs could not reach it. But they had gotten enough to hurt her case significantly, and they had sent a clear message: we can reach you whenever we want. Emma returned to the car where Lily sat with wide, frightened eyes, and as they drove to the house, Emma saw her daughter's hands were shaking. Inside, while Emma checked to make sure the house had not also been violated, Lily sat on her sleeping bag and began to cry, not loud sobs but quiet, hopeless tears that were somehow worse. "I want to leave," Lily whispered. "I don't like it here. I'm scared all the time. Why can't we just go?" Emma held her daughter, feeling the small body trembling against her, and had no answer that a 7-year-old would understand. How could she explain that leaving meant children would keep dying, that running meant her aunt's murder would go unpunished, that surrender meant evil people would win simply because they had more money and power? But Lily was right to be scared because Emma understood with cold clarity that they were being watched constantly. The break-in had happened during the exact 3 hours they were gone, which meant someone had been observing their movements, waiting for the perfect moment. The property was isolated, 6 miles from town on a road no one traveled, and yet their every action was being tracked and reported. She needed to get the evidence to someone who could act on it, someone beyond the reach of Cascade's corruption, but she was trapped. Her car could be impounded at any moment. Child Protective Services could arrive and take Lily, and the demolition order was counting down like a bomb. Derek Vance's deadline was tomorrow at noon, and Emma had run out of moves. Emma drove into town before dawn the next morning, leaving while it was still dark to avoid whoever was watching the property, with Lily asleep in the passenger seat wrapped in a blanket. She went directly to Sarah's house, a small cottage behind the library, and knocked until the librarian answered in her bathrobe, bleary-eyed but instantly alert when she saw Emma's face. Inside, while Lily slept on Sarah's couch and the first light of morning broke over the mountains, Emma spread out everything she had left: the photocopies of checks and bank statements Sarah had given her, the photographs from the shed that she had hidden in her jacket, and printouts of the most damning pages from her aunt's journals that she had made before they were stolen. Sarah made coffee with shaking hands and sat down at her kitchen table. "We need to digitize everything and get it somewhere safe," Emma said. "Somewhere they can't reach. Somewhere that survives even if I don't. Sarah pulled out her personal laptop and a high-resolution scanner. For the next 2 hours they worked in focused silence, scanning every document, every photograph, every piece of evidence at the highest quality setting. When they finished, Sarah uploaded everything to an encrypted cloud storage service, creating an account under a false name with a password only the two of them knew. The evidence was now beyond the reach of break-ins and intimidation, preserved in the digital ether where Cascade Industries could not destroy it. But having the evidence safe was only half the battle. They needed to get it to someone who could act on it. Someone with the power and independence to challenge a corporation that had corrupted an entire county's leadership. Sarah pulled up the EPA's website and began searching through personnel directories, looking for someone who specialized in corporate environmental crimes and was far enough from Montana to be outside Cascade's influence. She found him buried in the organizational charts. Dr. James Reeves, a senior investigator based in Denver, with a record of successfully prosecuting 3 major corporations for environmental violations. His biography mentioned his focus on water contamination cases and his reputation for being immune to political pressure. Emma created a new anonymous email account, using the library's public Wi-Fi to mask her location, and began composing a message. She kept it short and factual, like her aunt would have written it. Dr. Reeves, I am contacting you regarding systematic water contamination in Flathead County, Montana, by Cascade Industries. Attached are samples of evidence including laboratory reports showing arsenic and lead levels exceeding EPA standards, financial records proving bribery of local officials, and medical documentation of affected children. This is not speculation. This is 5 years of documented proof. The local authorities are compromised. A woman who was investigating this, Margaret Holloway, died under suspicious circumstances in April. I am her successor, and I am in danger. The full evidence archive is located at GPS coordinates 48.7234 newtons, 114.3421 W. If you do not hear from me within 2 weeks, assume I have been silenced, and send federal agents to that location immediately. The children are still getting sick. Someone with power must act. She attached a carefully selected sample of the evidence. 3 lab reports, 2 of the most damning checks showing payments to county officials, and 5 photographs of sick children. She did not send everything because if this email was intercepted, she needed to hold some cards back, but she sent enough that any honest investigator would have to take it seriously. She included the GPS coordinates of the cave, the contaminated sites, and the processing plant. Sarah read the email twice, then nodded. Emma's finger hovered over the send button for a long moment, knowing that once she clicked it, there was no going back, no more negotiating with Derek Vance, no more pretending she might walk away. Then she thought of Lily's terrified face, of Mia Chen too weak to stand, of her aunt's letter saying the children were dying, and she clicked send. The email disappeared into the digital void, and now all Emma could do was wait and try to survive long enough for help to arrive. The sheriff arrived the next morning with 2 deputies and a county work crew in a truck loaded with demolition equipment. Emma watched them from the porch as they pulled up, her phone already out and recording, her heart pounding but her hands steady. Sheriff Dawson was a large man in his late 50s, with a weathered face and eyes that would not quite meet hers, and he approached holding the demolition order like a shield. Miss Holloway, I'm here to enforce the county's demolition order. You need to vacate the property immediately so the work crew can begin tearing down this structure. Emma held up her phone, making sure he could see the red recording light. Sheriff, I've spent the last 3 days in the county law library. According to Montana State Code 763504, a demolition order for an inhabited structure requires a formal administrative hearing with at least 14 days' notice to the property owner. I was never notified of any hearing, never given a chance to contest the order, and never provided with the required appeal process documentation. This order is illegal. The sheriff's face flushed, and one of the deputies shifted uncomfortably. The inspector filed his report. The county approved the order. That's all that's required. Emma shook her head, still filming. That's not what the law says. I have copies of the relevant statutes, and I've already filed a formal complaint with the State Attorney General's office documenting the violation of my due process rights. If you proceed with this demolition, you'll be knowingly executing an illegal order, and I'll have video evidence of it. She stepped forward, her voice stronger. I'm also filing a federal civil rights complaint under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983 for deprivation of property without due process. Every person here will be named as a defendant in that lawsuit. The work crew foreman, a man who probably just wanted to do his job and go home, looked at the sheriff with alarm. The deputies exchanged glances. Sheriff Dawson's jaw tightened, and for a moment Emma thought he might proceed anyway, but then he seemed to deflate slightly. "This is a mistake," he said quietly. "You're making powerful people very angry, and I can't protect you from what happens next." Emma met his eyes. "I'm not asking you to protect me. I'm asking you to follow the law." The sheriff looked at her for a long moment, something that might have been respect or pity flickering across his face. Then he turned to the work crew. "Pack it up. We'll need to go back to the county and sort this out." As they loaded the equipment and prepared to leave, he walked back to Emma, close enough that the phone's microphone might not catch his words. "You have maybe a week before they find a way around this. Powerful people are losing patience, and when that happens, they stop playing by any rules at all. If you're smart, you'll take whatever they're offering and disappear." He climbed into his truck and led the convoy away, leaving Emma standing alone on the porch, her whole body trembling with the aftershock of adrenaline. She had won this round, but she understood it was a temporary victory, a small delay in an inevitable escalation. That night, as the sun set and shadows lengthened across the property, Emma made a decision. She packed their sleeping bags, food, water, and flashlights, then took Lily's hand. "We're going camping tonight, baby. A real adventure." They hiked to the cave as darkness fell, and Emma led her daughter through the narrow opening into the cool stone chamber. She set up their sleeping area near the back wall, surrounded by the refrigeration unit humming softly, the metal case of hard drives, and her aunt's letter. Lily looked around with wide eyes at the strange underground room. "Why are we sleeping here?" Emma pulled her daughter close. "Because this is the safest place on the whole property. These walls have stood for thousands of years, and they'll keep us safe tonight." They lay together in their sleeping bags, the evidence surrounding them like a protective wall. And Emma stayed awake long into the night, listening to every sound, waiting for help that might never come. Emma and Lily had been sleeping in the cave for 3 nights when Sarah appeared at the property during the day with news that made Emma's heart leap. Dr. James Reeves had responded to the email within 12 hours, had taken a personal day from the EPA, and had driven through the night from Denver. He was waiting at Sarah's house right now, and he needed to see everything immediately but with absolute secrecy. Emma left Lily with Sarah and met Dr. Reeves in the librarian's kitchen, and she knew within 30 seconds that this was someone she could trust. He was in his early 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the weathered hands of someone who spent more time in the field than behind a desk. He wore hiking boots and field clothes, and he listened to Emma's story without interrupting, taking notes in a small, waterproof journal. When she finished, he looked at her with an expression of grim determination. "I need to see the cave. I need to test the water sources myself, and I need to interview the affected families. But we have to do this completely off the books. If Cascade Industries finds out the EPA is investigating, they'll destroy evidence, intimidate witnesses, and tie us up in legal challenges for years. Can you keep this quiet?" Emma nodded, and over the next 2 days, a carefully orchestrated operation unfolded. Dr. Reeves had brought a small team, 2 other EPA investigators and a forensic scientist who specialized in environmental contamination. They arrived in unmarked personal vehicles, dressed like tourists, and worked with the focused intensity of professionals who knew they had one chance to get this right. Dr. Reeves spent hours in the cave, examining the solar-powered refrigeration unit with something close to reverence, photographing the preserved samples, and carefully inventorying the backup hard drives. He tested the samples himself using portable equipment, confirming Margaret's results, and took additional samples from the same GPS coordinates for independent verification. The forensic scientist mapped the cave system, documented the connection to the upstream disposal site, and took core samples from the stone that would prove the timeline of contamination. The other 2 investigators interviewed the affected families, recording testimonies and collecting medical records, and Emma watched as professional documentation transformed personal tragedy into prosecutable evidence. On the second evening, Dr. Reeves sat with Emma on a fallen log near the creek while his team finished their work. "Your aunt built one of the most comprehensive cases of corporate environmental crime I've ever seen. The evidence is meticulous, the documentation is thorough, and the pattern of contamination is undeniable. Combined with the financial records showing systematic bribery, this is a federal case that could result in criminal charges, not just civil penalties. Emma felt hope surge through her for the first time in weeks. How long until you can act? Dr. Reeves's expression turned serious. That's the problem. Building a prosecutable case at this level takes time. We need to verify every sample independently, interview witnesses formally, serve subpoenas for company records, and coordinate with the FBI on the corruption charges. That's months of work, and it has to be done carefully because Cascade Industries will have expensive lawyers looking for any procedural error to get the case thrown out. He looked at her directly. I need you to survive for at least 6 weeks while we build this case. Can you do that? Can you stay hidden, stay safe, and not do anything that tips them off that federal investigators are involved? Emma thought of Derek Vance's deadline, of the sheriff's warning, of the break-in and the slashed tires and the demolition order. I'll try. Dr. Reeves put a hand on her shoulder. Your aunt was a hero and so are you. What you're doing matters. Those families, those children, they're going to get justice because you refused to walk away. Hold on just a little longer. Emma looked at the envelope on the porch railing, at Victoria Sterling's cold eyes, and made a decision that was part strategy and part desperate gamble. I need 24 hours to think about this and to talk to my daughter. This is her future too. Victoria studied her for a long moment, and Emma forced herself to look uncertain, defeated, exactly like a woman who was about to break. Finally, Victoria nodded. 24 hours. Tomorrow at this same time, you'll either sign or face the consequences. She and Derek drove away, leaving Emma alone with the offer that was designed to look like salvation but was actually a trap. As soon as they were gone, Emma called Dr. Reeves on the secure number he had given her and told him everything. His response was immediate and decisive. They're not going to wait 24 hours. If I know this company's pattern, they'll come tonight to force your compliance. They've made their final offer, and now they'll use violence to close the deal. We need to be ready. Within 3 hours, federal agents arrived at the property in unmarked vehicles, parking a half-mile away and approaching on foot through the forest. Dr. Reeves came with them, along with 6 FBI agents specializing in corporate crime and intimidation cases. They set up surveillance equipment in the woods surrounding the house, positioned cameras with night vision capability, and briefed Emma on exactly what to do. She and Lily would sleep in the cave as they had been, but Emma would return to the house at midnight and make it look occupied, lights on, movement visible through windows. The federal agents would record everything that happened next. Emma waited in the house as instructed, her heart pounding, and just after 1 in the morning she heard vehicles approaching with their headlights off. 3 trucks, and from them emerged 6 men dressed in dark clothes, moving with the purposeful coordination of professionals. They did not knock. 2 of them kicked in the front door while the others spread out to cut off escape routes, and Emma stood in the center of the room holding her phone as if she had been caught by surprise. The leader, a scarred man with cold eyes, grabbed her arm roughly. Where's the evidence? The samples, the hard drives, all of it. You're going to take us to it right now, and then you're going to sign the papers. Emma tried to pull away, her fear only partially an act. I don't know what you're talking about. The man pulled out a syringe from his jacket. Your aunt was stubborn too. We gave her something that stopped her heart, made it look natural, no trace in the blood. You want the same, or do you want to cooperate? It was exactly the confession Dr. Reeves had hoped for, and it was all being recorded in high definition from 4 different angles. The FBI agents moved in from the darkness like ghosts, weapons drawn, voices sharp with authority. Federal agents, on the ground now. The 6 hired men froze, then scrambled to comply, and within minutes they were all face down in the dirt with hands zip-tied behind their backs. The leader, faced with federal charges including attempted murder and conspiracy, started talking before they even got him to the vehicles. He gave them everything: the name of the executive who had hired them, the payments made through shell companies, the other jobs they had done for Cascade Industries over the years, and most importantly, the details of Margaret Holloway's murder. The toxin had been provided by the company, administered by someone posing as a utility worker checking the water meter, designed to cause cardiac arrest that would look completely natural to any medical examiner not specifically looking for it. Emma stood in the wreckage of her front door, watching federal agents arrest the men who had murdered her aunt, and felt something break open in her chest that was part grief and part savage satisfaction. Emma looked at the envelope on the porch railing, at Victoria Sterling's cold eyes, and made a decision that was part strategy and part desperate gamble. I need 24 hours to think about this and to talk to my daughter. This is her future, too. Victoria studied her for a long moment, and Emma forced herself to look uncertain, defeated, exactly like a woman who was about to break. Finally, Victoria nodded. 24 hours. Tomorrow at this same time, you'll either sign or face the consequences. She and Derek drove away, leaving Emma alone with the offer that was designed to look like salvation but was actually a trap. As soon as they were gone, Emma called Dr. Reeves on the secure number he had given her and told him everything. His response was immediate and decisive. They're not going to wait 24 hours. If I know this company's pattern, they'll come tonight to force your compliance. They've made their final offer, and now they'll use violence to close the deal. We need to be ready. Within 3 hours, federal agents arrived at the property in unmarked vehicles, parking a half-mile away and approaching on foot through the forest. Dr. Reeves came with them, along with 6 FBI agents specializing in corporate crime and intimidation cases. They set up surveillance equipment in the woods surrounding the house, positioned cameras with night vision capability, and briefed Emma on exactly what to do. She and Lily would sleep in the cave as they had been, but Emma would return to the house at midnight and make it look occupied, lights on, movement visible through windows. The federal agents would record everything that happened next. Emma waited in the house as instructed, her heart pounding, and just after 1 a.m. she heard vehicles approaching with their headlights off. 3 trucks, and from them emerged 6 men dressed in dark clothes, moving with the purposeful coordination of professionals. They did not knock. 2 of them kicked in the front door while the others spread out to cut off escape routes, and Emma stood in the center of the room holding her phone as if she had been caught by surprise. The leader, a scarred man with cold eyes, grabbed her arm roughly. Where's the evidence? The samples, the hard drives, all of it. You're going to take us to it right now, and then you're going to sign the papers. Emma tried to pull away, her fear only partially an act. I don't know what you're talking about. The man pulled out a syringe from his jacket. Your aunt was stubborn too. We gave her something that stopped her heart, made it look natural, no trace in the blood. You want the same, or do you want to cooperate? It was exactly the confession Dr. Reeves had hoped for, and it was all being recorded in high definition from 4 different angles. The FBI agents moved in from the darkness like ghosts, weapons drawn, voices sharp with authority. Federal agents, on the ground now. The 6 hired men froze, then scrambled to comply, and within minutes they were all face down in the dirt with hands zip-tied behind their backs. The leader, faced with federal charges including attempted murder and conspiracy, started talking before they even got him to the vehicles. He gave them everything, the name of the executive who had hired them, the payments made through shell companies, the other jobs they had done for Cascade Industries over the years, and most importantly, the details of Margaret Holloway's murder. The toxin had been provided by the company, administered by someone posing as a utility worker checking the water meter, designed to cause cardiac arrest that would look completely natural to any medical examiner not specifically looking for it. Emma stood in the wreckage of her front door, watching federal agents arrest the men who had murdered her aunt, and felt something break open in her chest that was part grief and part savage satisfaction. The raid happened at dawn, coordinated across multiple locations with the precision of a military operation. While Emma stood in her house watching the hired men being loaded into federal vehicles, 60 miles away in Billings, 24 FBI agents in tactical gear were surrounding the glass and steel headquarters of Cascade Industries. At the same moment, another team was descending on the processing plant in the mountains, blocking all exits and securing the premises before anyone inside could destroy evidence. Victoria Sterling was in her corner office on the top floor when the agents came through her door with a warrant, and security footage later showed her face transforming from shock to cold fury to resignation in the space of 3 seconds. Derek Vance was arrested at his home, still in his pajamas, his carefully cultivated professional image shattered as he was led out in handcuffs past his horrified neighbors. The FBI seized computers, file cabinets, and boxes of documents, loading them into trucks, while company employees stood in the parking lot watching their world collapse. But it was the digital forensics team that found the most damning evidence. buried in company servers that executives had thought were secure. There were emails going back 8 years, internal communications between Victoria Sterling and her executive team discussing water contamination reports from their own company scientists. The emails showed they had known about the arsenic and lead levels, had known the contamination was spreading into the local watershed, and had made a calculated business decision that paying occasional fines was cheaper than implementing proper waste disposal procedures. One email from Victoria herself, dated 6 years ago, was particularly chilling. Projected cleanup costs exceed 40 million. Projected fines if caught are 8 million over 10 years. The math is simple. Proceed with current disposal protocols and manage regulatory oversight through existing channels. The existing channels were the bribes, and the FBI found meticulous records of every payment made to every official over 7 years. The Financial Crimes Unit traced money through shell companies and offshore accounts, following paper trails that led directly to Sheriff Dawson, Inspector Morrison, County Commissioner Frank Barrett, and 2 members of the County Health Board. Each payment was documented, dated, and tied to specific actions: dismissed complaints, favorable inspection reports, denied permits for independent water testing, and interference with Margaret Holloway's investigation. By noon, the local arrests began. Sheriff Dawson was taken into custody at his office, his deputies watching in stunned silence as federal agents read him his rights for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and accepting bribes from a criminal enterprise. Inspector Morrison was arrested at a diner where he was eating lunch, still holding a forkful of meatloaf when the handcuffs went on. County Commissioner Barrett tried to run, making it as far as the parking lot of the county building before 2 agents tackled him to the asphalt. The processing plant inspection revealed what Margaret had suspected and documented: illegal dumping sites, falsified environmental reports showing clean water where samples were actually toxic, and a disposal system designed to channel waste directly into the underground aquifer that fed the entire valley. The plant manager, faced with criminal charges, cooperated immediately and provided detailed testimony about orders that had come directly from Victoria Sterling to continue operations despite knowing the environmental damage. By evening, the story had broken across national news networks. Footage of Victoria Sterling being led from her office in handcuffs, images of the contaminated processing plant, and interviews with the affected families created a firestorm of public outrage. Cascade Industries' stock price collapsed within hours, and by the closing bell the company had lost 2/3 of its value. Emma watched it all unfold on Sarah's television, sitting on the couch with Lily beside her and a cup of coffee growing cold in her hands, and she thought of her aunt's letter, of the words "someone must finish this," and she understood that Margaret's fight had not been in vain after all. The story broke on the national news networks within hours of the arrests, and by the next morning it had become the lead story across every major outlet in the country. Emma woke in Sarah's guest room to find trucks with satellite dishes lining the street outside, reporters doing stand-ups in front of the library, and her phone ringing constantly with calls from journalists, producers, and talk show bookers who had somehow obtained her number. The narrative that emerged in those first frantic days was one the media loved: a young single mother, drowning in medical debt and living in her car, inherits a worthless property and discovers her murdered aunt's evidence of corporate environmental crime, then single-handedly brings down $1 billion corporation. Emma became the face of the case almost immediately, photographers capturing her standing on the porch of the ruined house with Lily, the Montana mountains rising behind them like a testament to David defeating Goliath. She gave interviews because Dr. Reeves told her the public attention was protection, that Cascade Industries could not make her disappear while the cameras were watching, but she tried in every interview to redirect the focus. "I'm not the hero of this story," she said again and again to reporters who wanted to make her into something larger than life. "My aunt, Margaret Holloway, she's the one who spent 5 years investigating, documenting, and building this case. She's the one who died trying to protect these families. I just finished what she started." She insisted that every news segment include footage of the affected children, that every article mention the families by name, that the human cost of Cascade's crimes not be buried under the corporate scandal narrative. Journalists descended on Pinewood like an occupying army, turning the quiet mountain town into a media circus. The general store where Mr. Garrett had warned Emma away now had reporters lined up buying coffee and asking questions. The library became an impromptu press center, and the affected families found themselves suddenly besieged by cameras and microphones. Maria Kowalski gave a tearful interview standing beside 8-year-old Ethan, showing his rashes and explaining how doctors had told her she was imagining her son's illness. The Henderson twins appeared on a national morning show, their parents explaining years of gaslighting by company-paid physicians who insisted nothing was wrong even as their daughters grew sicker. Linda Chen allowed cameras into her home to film 5-year-old Mia, still too weak to stand, and her quiet dignity as she described watching her daughter suffer while being told it was all in her head broke hearts across the country. Medical experts reviewed the evidence and confirmed what Margaret had documented. The children's illnesses were consistent with chronic exposure to arsenic and heavy metals. Their symptoms matched the scientific literature on environmental poisoning, and the contamination levels in the water samples were more than sufficient to cause the damage. Independent testing of the family's well water, conducted by university researchers who descended on the area, confirmed the presence of industrial toxins at levels far exceeding EPA safety standards. The vindication the families had waited years for finally arrived, though it came too late for the childhoods already stolen and the damage already done. The media attention had a cascading effect on Cascade Industries. Investigative journalists dug into the company's history and found similar patterns of contamination and corruption in 3 other states, communities that had been quietly suffering while local officials looked the other way. Environmental groups filed lawsuits, shareholders launched a class action suit claiming fraud and misrepresentation, and corporate partners began severing ties to avoid the reputational damage. The company's stock price, which had already collapsed on the day of the arrests, continued its freefall as trading resumed. Within a week, Cascade Industries had lost 90% of its market value. Major banks called in loans, insurance companies canceled policies, and suppliers demanded cash payment up front. 2 weeks after the raids, Victoria Sterling's lawyers filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, but the move came too late to save the company. The bankruptcy court appointed a trustee to liquidate assets, and Cascade Industries, which had been a billion-dollar corporation with operations in 6 states, effectively ceased to exist. The processing plant in Montana was shuttered, its equipment seized as evidence, and environmental engineers began the long process of assessing the cleanup costs. Emma watched it all unfold with a strange sense of detachment, as if she were watching events happen to someone else. She did the interviews, she answered the questions, she posed for the photographs, but inside she felt hollowed out, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. Lily seemed confused by the attention, sometimes enjoying the cameras and sometimes hiding behind Emma's legs, and Emma worried constantly about what this exposure was doing to her daughter's sense of normalcy and safety. Sarah became her anchor, managing the media requests, screening the calls, and making sure Emma and Lily had quiet time away from the circus. Mr. Garrett came to Sarah's house one evening, hat in hand, and apologized for his coldness when Emma had first arrived, explaining he had been afraid and ashamed. Other townspeople followed, people who had known Margaret and had kept silent, and Emma accepted their apologies because she understood that fear was a powerful thing and that courage was rare. Standing in front of the cameras, telling her aunt's story to a nation that was finally listening, Emma felt the weight of the burden Margaret had passed to her, but she also felt something else. The fierce satisfaction of knowing that the children would get justice, that the poisoning would stop, and that her aunt's death had not been meaningless after all. The federal courthouse in Billings was packed on the day Judge Patricia Morrison delivered her ruling, every seat filled with affected families, journalists, environmental advocates, and attorneys representing dozens of parties with claims against the bankrupt Cascade Industries. Emma sat in the front row with Lily beside her, Sarah on her other side, and Dr. Reeves directly behind them. The hearing had lasted 3 weeks, with testimony from medical experts, environmental scientists, the arrested executives who had turned state's evidence, and the families whose children had been poisoned. Victoria Sterling and Derek Vance, facing criminal trials that would likely result in decades in prison, had been brought from custody to hear the judgment, their expensive suits and polished appearances now hollow costumes that fooled no one. Judge Morrison was a woman in her early 60s with steel-gray hair and a reputation for being absolutely uncompromising when it came to corporate malfeasance, and when she began reading her decision, her voice carried the weight of moral authority that transcended the legal formalities. She started by detailing the scope of Cascade Industries' crimes: 8 years of knowing contamination, systematic bribery of public officials, deliberate falsification of environmental reports, and the murder of Margaret Holloway to silence her investigation. She described the impact on the affected families with a precision that made several people in the courtroom weep openly, noting that 12 children had been diagnosed with chronic illnesses directly attributable to the contamination, and that the long-term health effects might not be fully known for decades. Then she delivered her ruling, and the numbers were staggering. The settlement she ordered was the largest environmental judgment in Montana history, and one of the largest in the nation. Cascade Industries' remaining assets, totaling approximately $370 million after liquidation, would be placed in a court-supervised trust. From that trust, $200 million would be allocated for comprehensive environmental cleanup of the contaminated sites, removal of toxic waste, and restoration of the watershed to EPA standards, a process that environmental engineers estimated would take 5 to 7 years. $50 million would establish a medical monitoring fund for the affected families, providing free health care, specialist treatment, and compensation for ongoing medical expenses for the next 30 years, or until the youngest affected child reached age 40, whichever came later. Each family would also receive individual compensation, $2 million for each child who had been poisoned, paid immediately to accounts controlled by court-appointed trustees until the children reached majority. An additional $30 million would go to the county for infrastructure improvements, including new water treatment facilities and upgraded testing protocols to prevent future contamination. The remaining funds would be distributed among various claimants, including former Cascade employees, shareholders who had been defrauded, and communities in other states where the company had operated. Judge Morrison then addressed Emma directly, asking her to stand. "Miss Holloway, your Aunt Margaret spent 5 years and an estimated $120,000 of her own money investigating this case, money she never recovered. Additionally, she suffered documented harassment, property damage, and ultimately paid with her life. You have continued her work at great personal risk. Therefore, I am awarding you, as Margaret Holloway's heir and successor, the sum of $5 million in compensatory damages for her legal fees, investigative costs, and pain and suffering, as well as punitive damages for the campaign of intimidation you yourself endured." Emma felt her knees go weak, and Sarah grabbed her arm to steady her. $5 million. More money than she could have imagined. Enough to pay off every debt, give Lily every opportunity, rebuild their lives completely. But Judge Morrison was not finished. Additionally, I am issuing an order designating the property known as the Holloway Homestead, including all 40 acres and specifically the cave system containing the evidence archive, as a protected historical site under federal jurisdiction. The land will be placed in a conservation trust, ensuring it can never be developed or sold. The cave archive will be maintained as a museum and educational center, a permanent monument to Margaret Holloway's courage and a reminder of the cost of corporate greed. Miss Holloway, you will retain life estate on the property and serve as the trust's administrator if you choose to accept. Emma looked at Lily, at Sarah, at Dr. Reeves, and then at the judge, and she managed to speak despite the tears streaming down her face. "I accept, Your Honor. My aunt would want this place to mean something, to teach people that one person can make a difference." Judge Morrison nodded with something that might have been a smile. The court is adjourned. The courtroom erupted in applause, and Emma was immediately surrounded by the affected families, by Maria Kowalski and Linda Chen and the Hendersons, all of them crying and hugging her and thanking her. Photographers captured the moment, and it would become one of the iconic images of the case. Emma at the center of a circle of families, Lily clutching her mother's hand, all of them united in grief and vindication and the hard-won knowledge that justice, though delayed, had finally arrived. That evening, Emma stood outside the courthouse with Dr. Reeves, watching the sun set over the mountains. "Your aunt saved those families," he said quietly. "And you made sure her sacrifice mattered." Emma thought about the letter in the cave, about the words, "Someone must finish this." And she realized that she had not just finished Margaret's work, but had transformed it into something permanent, something that would outlast them all. The evidence would be preserved, the families would be compensated, the children would get the medical care they needed, and the land her aunt had died protecting would stand as a testament to the truth that corporations could be held accountable, and that ordinary people, armed with courage and evidence and an unwillingness to surrender, could defeat even the most powerful enemies. The settlement money arrived in Emma's account on a Tuesday morning in late summer, and she sat in Sarah's living room staring at her phone's banking app, at the number that seemed impossibly large, transforming her from someone who had counted pennies for gas money into someone who would never have to worry about money again. $5 million. She paid off every debt first, methodically working through the list that had haunted her for 2 years. The hospital bills, the collection agencies, the credit card companies that had charged her 30% interest on her desperation. She watched the balances drop to zero one by one, and with each payment she felt a physical lightening, as if chains she had worn so long she had forgotten their weight were finally being removed. Then she turned her attention to the property, to the ruined house that had become the center of everything. She could have torn it down and built something modern and easy, but that felt like erasing her aunt's memory, like admitting the place had only ever been worthless. Instead, she hired a local contractor, a man named Tom Chen who was Linda's brother-in-law, and told him she wanted the house rebuilt properly, restored to what it had been but made solid and safe and real. She wanted a home. The project began in September, and what started as a simple construction job became something larger, something that felt like the town itself healing. Tom brought his crew, but he also brought volunteers. Mr. Garrett showed up on the second day with his truck full of supplies and his tool belt strapped around his waist, and when Emma thanked him, he shook his head and asked to speak with her privately. They stood at the edge of the clearing, looking out at the mountains, and the old man's voice was thick with emotion. "I need to apologize to you properly, not just for being cold when you first came to the store, but for being a coward. Your aunt came to me 5 years ago, showed me some of her research, asked if I'd seen families getting sick. I told her I didn't want to get involved, that I had a business to protect, and I sent her away. She came back twice more, and each time I turned her down because I was afraid of what Cascade would do to me if I helped her." He looked at Emma with eyes that were red-rimmed and ashamed. "I've lived in this town for 60 years, and I let children get poisoned because I was afraid of losing my store. Your aunt was braver than me, and you're braver than me. And I'm here now because it's too late to help her, but maybe it's not too late to help you." Emma put her hand on the old man's shoulder. "You're here now. That's what matters." The Hendersons came with their twins and spent weekends clearing brush and hauling debris. Maria Kowalski brought Ethan, who was already looking healthier after 2 months of treatment funded by the settlement, and they planted wildflowers along the path from the road to the house. Other townspeople Emma had never met arrived with casseroles, tools, and a quiet determination to be part of something good after years of being complicit in something terrible. Sarah was there almost every day, and the friendship that had begun in desperate circumstances in a library alley deepened into something that felt like family. She helped Emma make decisions about paint colors and floor plans, kept Lily entertained when the construction noise got overwhelming, and sat with Emma on the porch in the evenings, drinking wine and talking about futures that no longer felt impossible. They decided that when the house was finished, Emma would take over managing the Cave Archive as a museum and educational center, and Sarah would help develop curriculum for school groups, turning Margaret's evidence into lessons about environmental justice and the power of individual courage. The house rose from its ruins slowly, beam by beam and nail by nail. The sagging roof was torn off and replaced with new timber. The rotting logs were removed and replaced with treated lumber. The broken windows became double-paned glass that let in light but kept out the mountain cold. The stone chimney, the only part of the original structure that had remained solid, was cleaned and repointed, and above the mantel Emma had new words carved to replace the ones her aunt had written. "The truth will not stay buried, and neither will courage." They installed solar panels on the new roof, a modern well with filtration systems, and efficient heating that would make the Montana winters bearable. Emma designed Lily's room herself, painting it in soft colors and installing shelves for books and a window seat that looked out at the mountains. By late October, the house was finished, and it was beautiful, a solid structure of wood and stone that felt both new and timeless, a home that had been built not just with money and materials, but with the community's collective desire for redemption. On the day they moved in, Lily ran through the rooms with a joy Emma had not seen in years, and then she went outside to the old oak tree where the rusty swing had hung. Emma had replaced the swing with a new one, sturdy rope and a smooth wooden seat, and Lily climbed on and began to pump her legs, soaring higher and higher, her laughter floating across the property like music. Emma stood on the new porch watching her daughter play, feeling the autumn sun warm on her face, and realized that for the first time since the medical bills had started arriving, since her world had collapsed under the weight of debt and fear, she could breathe without that constant, crushing pressure on her chest. They were safe, they were home, and the future stretched before them full of possibility instead of dread. Emma stood in the rebuilt shed on a cold November morning, watching contractors install display cases and interactive exhibits where her aunt's laboratory equipment had once sat, and she felt the weight of purpose settling over her like a mantle she had been meant to wear all along. The settlement had given her $5 million, more money than she needed for a comfortable life, and she had spent weeks thinking about what Margaret would have wanted her to do with it. The answer had come to her while reading through her aunt's journals one evening, finding an entry from 3 years ago where Margaret had written, "If I succeed, these families will get justice. But what about the next families, in the next town, facing the next corporation? Someone needs to teach people that they don't have to be scientists or lawyers to fight back. They just need to be willing to document, to persist, and to believe that truth matters." Emma had taken those words and built them into something real. The Margaret Holloway Foundation for Environmental Justice was established with $3 million in seed funding, enough to create an endowment that would support the organization in perpetuity. The foundation's mission was simple: to help families and communities fight corporate environmental crimes by providing free water testing, connecting them with independent laboratories, offering legal support, and teaching them the documentation methods Margaret had perfected. Emma hired Dr. Reeves as the scientific director, convincing him to leave the EPA and dedicate himself full-time to this work, and she brought on 2 environmental lawyers who specialized in David versus Goliath cases. The foundation's first office opened in Billings, but Emma knew the real heart of the work would be here, on the 40 acres where her aunt had lived and died fighting. The shed, which had been ransacked and destroyed, was rebuilt as the Margaret Holloway Education Center, a small museum and teaching facility where school groups and community members could learn about environmental justice. The interior was designed to tell the story chronologically. One wall displayed photographs of Margaret, showing her transformation from a young woman to the determined investigator she became. Another wall featured the actual newspaper clippings with her handwritten notes, preserved behind glass, showing visitors how she had learned to read between the lines of official statements and identify patterns of deception. The laboratory equipment, what could be salvaged, and what Emma had replaced, was set up as a working demonstration space where students could learn basic water testing techniques. Interactive displays explained how to collect samples properly, how to document contamination, and how to navigate the bureaucracy of environmental complaints. The most powerful exhibit was a wall of photographs. The 12 children who had been poisoned, their faces enlarged and printed with their names and stories. A reminder that environmental crime was not abstract but personal, that every contaminated stream represented real families and real suffering. The cave itself became the centerpiece of the museum experience, accessible through guided tours that Emma led personally whenever school groups visited. She would take them through the narrow opening, let them feel the cool, constant temperature, and show them the solar-powered refrigeration unit that had preserved the evidence. She would explain how her aunt had understood that power worked through intimidation, and that the only defense was to make the truth indestructible by creating redundancy and hiding evidence where it could not be reached. Students would see the backup hard drives in their protective case, touch the stone walls that had stood for millennia and would stand for millennia more, and understand that ordinary people could create something powerful if they were strategic and brave. Emma also worked with Sarah to develop curriculum materials that schools across the state began adopting, lesson plans that used Margaret's investigation as a case study in scientific method, civic responsibility, and the power of individual action against systemic corruption. They created a documentary using footage from the trial, interviews with the affected families, and Emma's own testimony, and it was distributed free to schools nationwide. The foundation began receiving requests for help within weeks of its official launch. Calls from communities in Oregon and Nevada and Wyoming who had their own suspicions about contamination and their own experiences of being dismissed and gaslit by corporations and captured regulators. Emma and her team responded to each one, sending testing kits, providing guidance, and when the evidence warranted it, connecting families with lawyers and federal investigators who could act. By spring, they had opened 3 active cases, and Emma felt the satisfaction of knowing that her aunt's methodology was being replicated, that the system Margaret had developed for fighting back was now available to others who needed it. One evening, as Emma locked up the education center and walked back to the house where Lily was doing homework at the kitchen table, she stopped at the edge of the clearing and looked back at what they had built. The house with its lights glowing warm against the darkening sky, the education center with its mission to arm the powerless with tools and knowledge, the cave archive that would outlast them all, and the foundation that would continue the fight long after she was gone. She thought about the lawyer's letter that had arrived in that dingy motel room, about the photographs of a condemned house that everyone had called worthless, about the desperate decision to drive toward an uncertain future with her daughter and nothing else. She had thought she was running away from debt and failure, but her aunt had known better. Margaret had chosen her, not randomly but deliberately, had left this burden to the one person in the family who understood what it meant to fight for a child's future, who had already learned that surrender was worse than struggle, who had the strength to finish what needed finishing. Emma had not found her purpose by chance but by inheritance, and she wore it now with pride. Spring came to the Montana mountains with a rush of green that seemed to explode overnight, transforming the stark winter landscape into something lush and alive. The snow melted in cascading streams that fed into the creek running through Emma's property, and for the first time in 8 years, that water ran clear and clean, tested weekly by the Foundation's staff and confirmed safe by independent laboratories. The environmental cleanup had taken 18 months of intensive work, with crews removing contaminated soil, capping the illegal disposal sites, and installing filtration systems throughout the watershed. But the effort had succeeded beyond what even the optimistic engineers had predicted. The valley was healing, and with it, so were the children. Ethan Kowalski's rashes had faded, his energy returned, and he was playing Little League baseball, running bases with the speed of a healthy 8-year-old. The Henderson twins were back in school full-time, their developmental delays beginning to reverse with proper treatment and clean water. Mia Chen, who had been too weak to stand a year ago, was riding a bicycle her parents had bought her with the settlement money, her laughter ringing through the streets of Pinewood, like a declaration of victory over the corporation that had tried to steal her childhood. Emma stood on the porch of her home on a warm April morning, coffee cup in hand, watching the sun rise over the mountains and paint the valley in shades of gold and pink. The house behind her was solid and warm, filled with the sounds of Lily getting ready for school, the radio playing softly in the kitchen, the normal, beautiful, mundane sounds of a life that had finally found its rhythm. The 40 acres spread before her in their wild glory, the pine forest thick and healthy, the wildflower meadows already showing the first purple blooms of lupine, and in the distance she could see the oak tree where the swing moved gently in the morning breeze. Lily came out onto the porch, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, and she was 9 years old now, taller and stronger, and carrying herself with a confidence that had been impossible in those desperate motel room days. She stood beside her mother, and together they looked out at the land that had transformed their lives. "Mom," Lily said quietly, "do you think we'll ever leave here? I mean, when I grow up and go to college and stuff, will we sell this place?" Emma set down her coffee cup and put her arm around her daughter's shoulders, pulling her close. "This is home, baby. Not just the land, though the land is beautiful and important. But home is the community we've built here, the families we've helped through the foundation, the students who come to learn about Aunt Margaret's work. Home is Mr. Garrett stopping by every Sunday with fresh bread from the bakery, and Sarah coming over for dinner twice a week, and the Kowalskis inviting us to Ethan's baseball games. Home is knowing that what we do here matters, that the work we're doing prevents other families from suffering the way we suffered and the way the families in this valley suffered." She looked down at her daughter, seeing the intelligence and compassion in her eyes, seeing the person she was becoming. "Your Aunt Margaret, the woman I barely knew but who knew me somehow, she left us this place because she believed I had the strength to finish her fight. And I did, we did, but finishing wasn't the end, it was the beginning. We're guardians now, Lily. We guard the truth in that cave. We guard the memory of what happened here so it can never be forgotten or repeated. And we guard the families who are just beginning their own fights against powerful people who think money makes them untouchable." Lily nodded slowly, processing this. "Like superheroes, but without the capes," Emma laughed, the sound carrying across the clearing. "Exactly like that. We're ordinary people who refuse to give up, and that's the most powerful thing in the world. We went from having nothing, from living in a car and running from debt, to having this, and not because we won the lottery, but because we were willing to fight for it. That's a lesson worth teaching." A truck was coming up the road, and Emma recognized it as Tom Chen's, bringing the day's crew to continue work on the new visitor center they were building near the cave entrance. Behind him came Sarah's car, and then another vehicle Emma did not recognize, probably a family coming to tour the education center and learn about water testing. The work was constant, the mission never-ending, but Emma felt no burden in it, only purpose. She had arrived in Montana broken and desperate, dragging her daughter toward what everyone said was a worthless pile of rocks and rotten wood, and she had discovered instead that she had inherited not just land, but a calling. Margaret Holloway had spent 5 years building a case and had died before seeing justice, but her death had not been the end of the story, only a chapter, and Emma and Lily were writing the chapters that followed. They stood together on the porch as spring unfolded around them, as the creek ran clear, and the children played and the community they had helped heal welcomed another day. They had been victims once, powerless and afraid, but they had transformed into something stronger, guardians of truth, defenders of the vulnerable, and inheritors of a legacy that would outlast them both. Their watch had just begun, and they were ready.